What does it take to make a positive and lasting first impression? Now, I think we all have a general idea about how we do this. One thing is we try not to fidget that much. We try not to move our body so much that we might make other people uncomfortable. Another thing we might want to do is show interest in another person, to get them talking about themselves, to listen more than we speak. By doing this, we'll show other people that we're not selfish, that we actually care about them, and this will make a positive, lasting impression. Another thing that we can do is we can be careful about the types of information we share with other people. So we don't want to become aloof or standoffish, but we don't want to divulge too personal of details about ourselves to scare people away. So in effect, what we do when we're making a first impression is we're engaging in a lot of self-control, even though we don't realize it. It takes a lot of energy to have first meeting encounters. But what people often don't realize is the effect that they're having on others. Can we wear other people out? And how can we do that? And how can we avoid that? Well, one thing that we can do is we can understand some basic properties of interactions. What happens even when we don't think about it? One basic property of interactions is that we tend to mimic each other or mirror each other. Whether it's what we're saying or even how we're saying it or how our bodies are moving. We're naturally inclined to mirror other people. Now, there's some controversy about why this happens, but very reliably, studies have shown that people do this, and animals do it too. We mimic each other, we mirror each other, and this might help us form strong social bonds with other people. So what happens when you refuse to mimic with another person? How will that influence the other person's behavior? Will it make them like you more? Will it wear them out? Will it exhaust them because they're trying to make sense of what's happening? To answer this question, a group of researchers brought a bunch of students into a laboratory to have an interaction with a stranger. But what the students didn't realize is the stranger worked for the experimenter. She was a Confederate. Now, by random assignment, half of the participants were assigned to have an interaction in which this stranger mimicked them just like she normally would anyway. But for the other half of the participants, they were in a situation where they were meeting someone for the first time. And the person that they were meeting, that person was given strict instructions never to mimic the person. So the idea is that this would be exhausting to have an interaction like this. It wouldn't go smoothly. Next, what participants were given was an opportunity to exert self-control. And what the researchers found is that simply by having an interaction in which another person does not mimic you, it's exhausting to have that sort of interaction. And the way that they knew that is that participants struggled to control their impulses. So what these results show us is the importance of self-control in first meeting encounters. And not only the self-control in which we engage, but how other people's behavior can influence our own self-control. When people don't mimic us, it's a signal that something has gone awry, and we try to figure out what's going on. Engaging in this sort of mental exercise can wear us out, and it can have negative consequences for our own self-controlled behavior. Why do we like some people more than others? Now, this question baffles scientists and non-scientists. There are lots of different reasons why we like some people more than others. But one reason might be that some people we simply feel like we gel with. Now, this is a real effect. Think of your best friends. How much energy does it take to be around them? Do you feel a sense of ease and comfort when you're around them? As if you don't have to try to have a good time, to engage in positive activities, or simply a feeling that you can relax and let go and really be yourself. Now think of the people that you avoid. Now, we all have these people in our lives. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. Why is it that you avoid those people? It might be because they're mean or you disagree with them, but it could also simply be that it's very exhausting to be around them. You might think of them as high-maintenance interactions. So is it possible that some people can really wear us out that much? And might this help explain why we avoid some people more than others? Well, let's look at a study that really tested this idea. So what they did was they brought participants into a laboratory and they had them complete an interaction with another person. And this partner worked for the experimenter. And the person who worked for the experimenter, this confederate, they were given some instructions as to whether or not this was supposed to be a high or a low maintenance interaction. So what they had to do was give directions to the participant about how to solve a puzzle. Very simple task, and one that should be very easy to complete. It was easy for them to get on the same page. So for half of the participants, things went extremely smoothly. The partner said left, right, up, down, and so forth. And they were able to complete the task. For the other half of the participants, they were assigned to the high maintenance interaction partner. So they completed the same task, but this time the partner said, go left, right, no, wait, up, down, left, no. Okay, let's start over. Right, up, down, left, okay. Left, up, okay, I'm screwing this up. Let's start it over again. Up, left, right, you get the picture. So the idea is that that second interaction would wear people out mentally. It would exhaust them. And that's precisely what the researchers found. Across a variety of different measures, whether it was their physical endurance, their mental endurance, or even their logical or reasoning ability, all of these things went down after people had these sorts of high maintenance interactions. So what this shows us is the importance of being easy on others when we're having our relationships. They show that when we gel with other people, that this is a good thing. It might help explain how you can get people to like you. And it can also explain why you avoid some people. Because we only have a limited supply of mental energy to use, it would make sense that we would try to avoid people who are going to sap our energy without our permission. So be easy on other people. Try to get on the same page with others. And importantly, try to stay there. Because by doing that, you're going to be easier on the other person. They may want to be around you more. And you'll definitely not mentally fatigue them. Why do people use stereotypes? There are a lot of different reasons, and we never want to excuse the use of them. But one way that we can understand why people use stereotypes is that they simplify things. They're a mental conservation strategy. Now, we would hardly be human if we didn't use stereotypes, simply because we're constantly looking for ways to lessen the work that we have to do when we're trying to make sense of our environment. Think of the last time that you went grocery shopping. You were confronted with a lot of different people. And you have a natural propensity, as most humans do, to sort those people into different categories. You sorted them on the basis of their gender, on their age, other sorts of characteristics. That information helped you to understand your environment. It helped you understand who was working and who wasn't working, who were the children and who were the grown-ups. Now I want to give you a situation where I'm going to ask you a very simple question. I'm thinking of a person, and this person loves to play tennis. Now, another thing that he loves to do is he likes to listen to national public radio when he's driving, and he drives a lot. A third thing that he likes to do is read and write poetry. This is one of his biggest passions in life. In fact, when you ask him, what's something that you would love to do if you didn't have your current job, what would it be? He'd say, well, I'd love to be a poet. Now, what does this man do for work? Is he an Ivy League professor? Or is he a truck driver? Now, if you're like most people, your answer is Ivy League professor. But if you simply look at the number of Ivy League professors there are in the world and the number of truck drivers there are in the world, there's a greater probability that the man I just described to you drives trucks for a living. So a lot of times we're using stereotypes to make sense of our world. We have expectations about what other people do, what other people like. And it's this natural propensity that we have to override in order not to use stereotypes sometimes. And this takes self-control. So in one study, European participants sat down in a laboratory, and they were told to write an essay about a day in the life of a person. And they were shown a picture of a young man. Now, crucially, participants were told that this young man was a skinhead. For half of the participants, they were simply told, again, just write an essay about a day in the life of this person. But for the other half of the participants, they were given those instructions, but there was also something added on. They were given explicit instructions not to use any stereotypic information about this person in their essay. If they caught themselves, they're supposed to suppress their use of stereotypes. The idea is that suppressing stereotypes would take a lot of mental energy, and it did. Next to what participants were given were a series of self-control tasks, and across the board, what these results showed is that suppressing stereotypes was depleting, and it impaired later self-control performance. So what these results tell us is that we can have a better understanding about why people use stereotypes, and oftentimes how hard it is not to use them. It takes self-control to override our natural expectations about people, so that instead of thinking about them as members of groups, we think of them as individuals, as unique people who have unique characteristics and experiences that they bring with them to these situations. So although stereotypes help us simplify our lives, we shouldn't live by them, because history is replete with examples of how living by stereotypes can have disastrous consequences. Why are interracial interactions so distressing? We live in a time where there's never been more opportunity to have interactions with people of various backgrounds. Yet when you talk to people, oftentimes they report feeling distress when they're having interracial interactions. Why is that? Well, one reason is people may feel self-conscious. They might feel as if they're going to make a poor impression on the other person, and they might have to engage in more mental energy, more mental work to do that. So if that's true, what are the consequences of having interracial interactions? And might this explain why some people find them especially distressing? Now, to answer this question, one experiment looked at white participants who came into a laboratory and had an interaction with a stranger. For half of these participants, the stranger was also white, a person of the same racial background. For the other half of the participants, the person was an African American. And they had a brief discussion about various topics, including topics related to race. Afterwards, participants completed a self-control task. And this task is what's called the Stroop Color Naming Task. It's one of the most famous self-control tasks in all of psychology. This is the way it works. Participants read a word like the color red. But sometimes they have to ignore the meaning of the word and pay attention to the color in which the word is printed. So imagine reading the word red, but if it's printed in the ink blue, you have to look at the word red and say blue. This takes a lot of self-control energy. And what the researchers hypothesized is that when people have interracial interactions, they're going to be engaging in a lot of self-control during those interactions. And that might have direct implications for their performance on the Stroop task afterwards. And that's precisely what the researchers found. People who had had an interracial interaction, they performed worse on the Stroop task. But crucially, these deficits in self-control were most pronounced among people who are naturally biased in terms of their racial biases. So next, what these researchers did was they wanted to see how the brain works in these sort of situations. What's going on when Caucasian people, when they see African Americans compared to people of their same race? How can this explain why they're experiencing these problems in self-control? So what they did was an fMRI study where they brought participants into a facility where they were shown pictures of Caucasians and pictures of African Americans. During this entire period, they had their brain activity recorded. And what they showed is that these white participants, they engaged in more self-control processes at a neural level when they saw pictures of African Americans. But what's more important is that this brain activation had direct consequences for these participants' later self-control performance. So this gives us some understanding about some of the neural mechanisms underlying why interracial interactions can deplete us of our self-control energy. We engage in more mental work when we're doing them. So how can we have better interracial interactions? Well, one way that we can do this is we can simply have a very clear sense of what we should say and what we shouldn't say in them. In fact, one study showed that if you simply give white participants a script of what to say in their interracial interactions, suddenly they're not as mentally fatigued later on. So I'm not saying that we should bring scripts with us into our interactions with other people. We wouldn't want to do that. But one thing that we can do is think carefully about things we want to say and things that we don't want to say when we're having interracial interactions. By having a clear script in our heads about what we want to say, we might be less likely to fall prey to some of these deficits in self-control that have been observed in these psychological studies. And the hope is that when people approach interracial interactions, they won't experience as much distress and anxiety. When does it pay to be mentally exhausted? We've been talking about all sorts of negative consequences of being fatigued, but there have got to be some positive things to it. Think about some interactions that you've had with other people, where they're constantly trying too hard. They're trying too hard to control what they're saying, what they're doing, maybe even what they're feeling. What's it like to have interactions with these people? Sometimes it can be frustrating. They don't seem genuine. They might even seem like they're extremely high maintenance, like they're not really going to let you know what they think deep down. Now, recently, some investigators have explored this question within the context of interracial interactions. Now, many times when people are having interracial interactions, there's a sense that people are trying too hard to make a good impression. And this can rub people the wrong way. So what these researchers did was something quite brilliant. What they did was they brought some Caucasian students into the laboratory and they sat them down. Next, what they did was they had these participants complete a task, and for half of them, this task was extremely mentally exhausting. For the other half, it didn't wear them out that much. So what the researchers really wanted to do is to mentally fatigue half of these participants before they had an interracial interaction. So next what they did was they had a stranger come into the laboratory room. And this stranger actually worked for the experimenter. Next, what this person did was they simply had an interaction talking about various things, including issues related to race relations. Afterwards, what they did was they had participants get ratings on how well they did during this interaction from their partner. So what do you think that these researchers found? Who was better off in making a good impression in this interracial interaction? People who had all of their mental energy to make a good impression, or people who were a little bit more mentally exhausted, who simply didn't have lots of energy to spend in trying to make a good impression? The results were clear. Participants who were mentally fatigued going into this interracial interaction were perceived more positively. They were perceived as less prejudiced and more direct. So this is some of the first evidence about the benefits of being mentally exhausted. It's not a good idea to try to make a good impression using all of your mental energy because you come off as less genuine than you really are. But there are other times when being low in mental energy might be a good thing. Think of romantic relationships or even friendships. Sometimes your partner is going to offend you. What's going to predict whether or not you're going to forgive them? Well, mental energy can give you some answer. So if this offense is extremely severe, if your partner really makes you angry, that's one thing. But most offenses aren't like that. Most of the time when our relationship partners upset us, they're extremely minor transgressions. And when people are mentally exhausted, a lot of times they are simply too tired to get into a fight. When there's a minor offense, it's not that big of a deal. And when people are fatigued, they simply don't have the energy to get into an argument. So these are a couple examples of when it pays to be mentally exhausted. When you're approaching an interaction that you might be nervous about, it might be important to think about the level of mental energy that you have going into it and trying not to use all of it, because by doing that, you might not appear genuine. And when it comes to your close relationships, think carefully about when your partner offends you. If it's a minor offense and you're very fatigued, a lot of times it simply won't pay to get into the argument. How can we become less reliant on stereotypes and avoid some of the pitfalls of having depleted mental energy? Well, let's talk about 3 simple ways that are scientifically validated that we can use. The first thing that we can do is simply become more aware of the mental energy that we're expending. Become a better mental energy accountant. Look at your daily activities and keep track of which of them are going to require lots of self-control and others that will not. By becoming aware of when you're going to spend self-control and when you're not going to, you can know and plan your interactions around the time when you're fully rested. So for the next week, again, keep track of your activities, but also keep track of the energy that you plan to expend in those activities. The next step is to look at the interactions that you're going to be having. And if you think that you're going to have an interaction where you need to use self-control, plan accordingly. What you'll find is that your interactions will go a lot more smoothly. And it's possible that you might not fall prey to many of the negative consequences we've seen that follow interracial interactions. Another way that we can improve the interactions that we're having and become less reliant on stereotypes is to build up our self-control strength. Now, one group of studies tested this possibility of whether you can actually do this. And they randomly assigned participants to practice self-control in various ways or not to practice self-control. Some of these tasks involved using your non-dominant hand for everyday activities, sitting up straight, speaking in complete sentences, things that we can all do, but oftentimes we have to exert self-control to do them. And what these studies showed is that participants who practiced self-control simply for 2 weeks, they became less reliant on stereotypes, especially in conditions when they were mentally fatigued. So what I would encourage you to do over the next 2 weeks is to practice self-control using some of these activities. Become very aware of your speech. Try to use complete sentences. Sit up straight instead of slouching. Use your non-dominant hand for everyday activities. What you'll find is that these sorts of activities, although they might seem very unrelated to your use of stereotypes, it will help you because you'll have more strength at your disposal. So that when you're confronted with situations that might stress you out, you'll have a better ability to approach that situation with strength, with self-control. And by doing that, not only will you have a greater sense of accomplishment after having your interaction, but you might also make a better impression on the other person. And maybe even have won a new friend.